And one moment. The studies have in fact focused on the analysis of the formal and the functional traits of English, minority language, dialect, and immigrant languages, placing the analysis within frameworks of language policy. Many studies conducted by the University of Siena on urban linguistic landscape have focused mainly on immigrant languages during last 20 years since 2004. In our Center of Excellence about immigrant languages, Italian language abroad, and Italian language in contact with migrant languages, we create a systematic map of Italian linguistic landscape using a method that allowed to immediately geolocate the science photographs. We presented in Luxembourg at Linguistic Landscape 9 our study on the presence of international students in Italian cities. The question we tried to answer was whether and how the presence of international students changed the urban linguistic landscape, creating new areas international student-oriented. At the same time, the study took into consideration the cities of Florence, Rome, and Siena as a particularly point of observation, and as particularly interested by the arrival of American and Chinese students. From the data, it emerged how the visibility of languages increases within and around the university buildings, but outside of them does not concentrate in a dedicated space. Strategies that rule this visibility are mostly top-down, administered by owners and institutions, and it's very difficult to find separate area for students, tourists, inhabitants. The visibility of languages in an urban linguistic landscape can be exploited as a pedagogical tool. An increasing number of scholars in recent years have applied theoretical tools and frameworks of linguistic landscape to educational research. Studies in this sense at international level have followed various strengths and have highlighted the advantages to which the use of linguistic landscapes could lead, as it can be used as an input for learning a second language, or for the development of intercultural competence, or for the increase of the awareness of linguistic diversity. Studies have also been carried out in this direction at our university too, particularly as regards to Italian as foreign language learning. You see in the slide some studies we conducted and an example of our questionnaires given to foreign students who were in our university to study Italian, consisting of various photographs and various questions. For example, you can see this picture about a picture in Istanbul, in Turkey, and the students answered that this picture maybe in other countries, in Italy, and so on. The research we will discuss today is a part of the theoretical framework of the linguistic landscape. One of the most interesting recent developments is looking at the link between linguistic landscape and educational contexts, such as school, kindergartens, or universities. A study of these environments is very useful given the importance they play in the lives of students and the school staff, and in general at a social level. Children and young people come into contact every day with a large number of languages which can be taught and used even visually within the school walls, or they can be excluded, with consequences in both cases of greater relief. School buildings are places full of messages in written form, which contribute to the creation of a specific image, and to the formation of the linguistic. Specifically, we define the schoolscape as the set of linguistic and semiotic objects that contributes to the visual organization of educational space. And later we have to say something about the presence of foreign students in the Italian school system, because in this graphic you can see the change of Italian school system, because actually in Italy we have 10% of the students of foreign origin, the first, second or generation, and only during the last 10 years this number increase, and this change is visible also in the school. This number of more than 800,000 students is not explicit, because we have to see in the slide 11 the country of origin of these students, and also the distribution on the territory, because you can see that there is no homogeneous distribution. The 70% of the students of foreign origin came from Romania, Albania, Morocco, China, and Philippines, and for this reason, the schoolscape and also the presence of immigrant languages in the school are very different. I think I can. We saw over 200 nationalities among non-Italian students, and the distribution on Italian territory is sufficient to look at the map to see how the vast majority of foreign students are concentrated in the northern and central north of the countries, and for this reason, many of the activities, many of the projects are located in this region. In the light of what has been said so far, it's clear that the Italian school is going to change. Furthermore, the management of linguistic diversity is the prerogative of school principal, of school teacher, which have wide autonomy. This autonomy covers linguistic diversity in the official curriculum, but goes beyond that as well. The latest statute governing education is law number 107 of 2015. One of its main objectives is that the development of language skills, with the particular reference to Italian as well as to English and other languages of the European Union. The law makes no suggestion, however, regarding the maintenance and the valorization of students' linguistic repertoire. Other documents, both European and Italian, which highlight the democratic dimension of plurilingualism and intercultural for the development of a global citizenship, are not prescriptive. they are merely guidelines and recommendation and are not supported by either fund or project. Given this factor, it's natural to ask what the situation really is in Italian school from a linguistic perspective. Which languages are part of students' linguistic repertoire and what do they think of this diversity? We collected many data during the last year about this, and the results are very different, and we found some school where the linguistic diversity is a value, and sometimes in other school this diversity is not sufficient studied, or the teacher prefer not teach about the diversity. You can see here some researches on some chapter forthcoming, and now I think Martina can continue the presentation. Thank you very much for the attention.
Okay, and thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm sorry, I cannot see anything.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the purpose of the research was twofold. On the one hand, in fact, we wanted to define a research method that, in line with what has been done in the urban environment, can be adequate to investigate the linguistic and semiotic schoolscape. In this sense, we wanted to develop and test the effectiveness of an annotation grid for the schoolscape, which contains and summarizes different taxonomies and perspectives. On the other hand, we wanted to investigate how the schoolscape is perceived, conceived, and lived. The goal was to describe and understand uses, including linguistic uses, functions, and attitudes toward the schoolscape in the Italian context, taking into consideration the general characteristics of schoolscapes and examining them in a comparative manner. Specifically, therefore, the research questions to which we try to answer have been formulated as you can see. So, what are the functions and roles of the schoolscape? How does the schoolscape change according to the school? Who and for what purpose participates in the creation of the schoolscape? What is the degree of awareness of the different actors towards the schoolscape and its usefulness? How is the schoolscape constituted from a linguistic perspective, and what is the relationship between schoolscape and plurilingual and intercultural education? And finally, what are the attitudes towards linguistic diversity visible in the schoolscape? Well, the research is part of the social and political context outlined by Professor Bagna a little while ago. The schoolscape, however, is a complex space. So resorting to conceptual and theoretical frameworks typical of different disciplines is necessary to describe it and its various components. Speaking of science, we need to refer to the studies of semiotics and communication, and in our case, in particular, to geosemiotics. Similarly, when dealing with spaces, places, and landscapes, it's necessary to draw on concepts elaborated in geography. And here, an essential theoretical basis is the one provided by Lefebvre in the form reworked by Trumper, H, and Malinowski of tripartite space, so space as perceived, conceived, and lived. Educational linguistics and sociolinguistics constitute other pivotal disciplines within this work, as one of the main focus is precisely on the linguistic dimension, that is on the ways in which plurilingualism of schools takes shape in the linguistic schoolscape. And finally, it's important to consider that educational linguistics goes hand in hand with the study of language policy, And in this work, the interpretation we give to language policy is in line with what was proposed by Spolsky. Therefore, policy is seen as management, practice, and ideologies. So, given these research objectives and questions, we decided to conduct multiple case studies. And in particular, we investigated 12 Italian secondary schools throughout the country. And the maps show where the schools are located. And they were lower secondary schools, so for children between 11 and 14, and upper secondary schools, so for students from 14 to 19. And we have selected schools with high percentages of pupils with migrant backgrounds, or with ongoing intercultural projects, or in which non-European languages were taught. And these schools were located in 9 of the 20 Italian regions, and they differ greatly in terms of location, not only at the regional level, but also in terms of city centers, suburbs, little town. And they differ also for grade, for curriculum, for the language offer, and of the ethnic and sociolinguistic background of the students. And this heterogeneity constitutes an important feature of the study, giving room to a great variety of analysis. Mixed methods were used to answer the research questions, adopting a triangulation design and combining both quantitative and qualitative tools. These included visual schoolscape data, field notes, interviews, and questionnaires, which were used in the various sample schools. And the figure represents the research design developed, and it takes into account both the phases and the tools used for data collection and analysis. Well, now we will see, we will explore in more detail all the tools used. The first type of data collected is made up of visual data of fixed signs. Since the size of the schools was relatively limited, complete documentation of all schools was possible, and data were collected both inside the buildings and outside in the immediate external spaces. And traditional methods of linguistic landscape studies were followed to collect visual data. So I conducted linguistic walks inside the buildings, observing the schoolscape and documenting the signs with photographs. But this was combined with a survey using the tourist guide technique proposed by Szabó, in which I was guided by a teacher who determined the route and indicates the artifacts to be analyzed. And what was discussed during the tour was summarized in field notes. And a quantitative analysis was conducted of the data collected, and the theoretical framework, as I just said, of geosemiotics was used. And so signs were analyzed by considering their concrete and material emplacement and their visual and multimodal characteristics. And the quantitative analysis was combined with a qualitative content analysis. To analyze the signs, it was essential to summarize the data in an analytic grid, drawing on contributions of various authors. And visual data were so classified through 21 indicators, distinguished in 5 thematic areas defined as informative, linguistic, of multimodality, of purpose, and of agency. Later, if you want, we can come back to the grid because we think it's an important result of the study. Now I will focus briefly just on the purpose area, because the purpose variables are, I think, one of the most original section of the grid, since despite having some works as reference points, the variables used were then elaborated independently and departing from what was previously proposed. So, taking up the distinction made by Landry and Boris and Gorter and Senots, we first wanted to distinguish between informative, symbolic, and mixed function of signs. But unlike the authors, this distinction was not made a priori, but renegotiated from time to time. The variable category was the last to be added and follows in part the distinction, the conceptualization proposed by Scollon and Scollon of discursive categories of science in the urban linguistic landscape. But here the taxonomy was created specifically for the school environment, and is very useful both on a descriptive and analytical level. And it includes 4 groups: the educational, advertising, decorative, and regulatory category. Also, with regard to the genre variable, we refer to the taxonomy proposed by Gorter and Senos, and we identified 10 different groups, but it was necessary to propose 2 variables of this type, so genre 1 and genre 2, as very often the units analyzed could have been included in more than 1 group, like the 2 examples that we propose here. Taking, for example, the picture above, it's a billboard made by students during English class and is relating to the behaviors to be kept or avoided in class or at school. So the sign has an informative function and has been classified within the educational category. Because it aims to the transmission of educational content, so also genre 1, didactic. But at the same time, the content analysis allows to consider the sign also related to the management of the class. It speaks about school rules, and it proposes words like you have to study a lot, you mustn't sing in the class, etc. That's why we propose 2 variables of this type. Well, in addition to visual data and field notes, 13 interviews were conducted with principals, with language teachers, or with intercultural managers that are teachers officially responsible for managing and organizing intercultural activities. And it was appropriate to use semi-structured interviews based on an interview guide, which identifies key topics relating to language policy, then school inclusion, projects related to interculture, and relating to the management and awareness of the schoolscape. Interviews were transcribed and analyzed through NVivo 12 Pro, and a mixed methodological approach, which includes a synthesis between qualitative content analysis and the principle of grounded theory, guided the analysis. And finally, questionnaires were administered to students and teachers, to students in presence, while to teacher online with Google modules. And the first section of the questionnaire was designed to obtain background information on informants, especially as regard the linguistic background of the students and of the teachers. Therefore, with reference to the languages part of the repertoire and to the uses in different domains, such as family, friends, and school. While the second section of the questionnaire was aimed to investigate practices and attitudes, and consists, as regard the students, of 41 items, and for teachers of 45 items. And these have been formulated on a Likert scale in 5 points. And this section was divided into 4 constructs, 4 thematic areas, which focus on attitudes toward language diversity, cultural diversity, attitudes toward language diversity in the linguistic landscape, and the final part regarding the schoolscape. Here we will focus on these, which includes 9 items aimed at students and 10 for teachers. Once the data were collected, they were then digitalized and analyzed using SPSS. And the score obtained for the items relating to the schoolscape were computed into 2 new variables relating the first one to practice and awareness of the usefulness of the schoolscape, the one we call the MediaPrat, MinPrat, and the second one relating to schoolscape attitudes toward language diversity. And these 2 variables were obtained from the mean of all scores for each informant. Okay, and at this point, the data were subjected to some analysis, both descriptive and inferential, with parametric and non-parametric tests. The data collected in total are what you can see in the slide. So we analyzed 1,981 signs from the Schoolscape, 13 interviews for a total of 6 hours and 42 minutes, and 709 questionnaires, of which 605 to students and 104 to teachers. Regarding visual data, the number of signs as can be seen, differs strongly according to the school, ranging from a minimum of 8 in school 3 to a maximum of 402 in school 6. All the 21 indicators shown before in the analytic grid have been used to conduct analysis, and in the various publication that Professor Bagna showed you before, if you are interested, you will find different results depending on the focus. Now, for reason of time, I cannot show you everything, also not to bore you. So we cannot look at everything, and we will go directly to the final interpretation to answer the research questions. Regarding the interviews, the coding process results in a total of 92 notes, both tree and child notes, and 951 references coded inside all sources. And the focused coding process made it possible to identify 4 tree nodes called School Management, Inclusion, Informant, and Schoolscape. And the thematic node of Schoolscape includes, in turn, specific child nodes that are the ones that you can see both in the table and in the scheme. And in the table, you can also see the number of sources and references related to each node. And these child nodes, we call them awareness and this interest of the Schoolscape, good practice emulation, languages on science, school buildings related to language problems, structural problems, sorry, the Schoolscape creation, Schoolscape management and policy, and Schoolscape uses. With regard to the questionnaires, Chromebook Alpha test was conducted, which gave a reliability coefficient in the case of the questionnaires for teachers of 0.75, while for students 0.87. So both constructs are considered valid. And as we said, the mean of all the items relating to the 2 variables of the Schoolscape, so awareness and attitudes, was calculated, and quite good values emerged for both type of informants, so for both students and teachers. But we notice higher values in relation to the aptitudes with respect to the degree of awareness of utility of the Schoolscape. The items related to the awareness are the one surrounded in red. And as you can see, they have a slightly lower average than those related to attitude. Okay, so turning to the results. The first research question formulated concerns the function of the Schoolscape. So like the urban linguistic landscape, the Schoolscape also proved to be an informative and pragmatic, but at the same time symbolic and ideological space. On the one hand, in fact, the school walls act as a support for the dissemination of messages of public utility, from regulatory issues to advertising messages, passing through purely didactic and educational themes. But on the other hand, the walls and school spaces are simultaneously exploited to highlight the founding values of the educational system and of individual schools, so to spread ideologies and symbolic messages. And these can take place explicitly, but also implicitly. And this is the case, for example, of multilingual science created in places not so much and not only to facilitate students and parents who are not competent in Italian to orient themselves inside schools, but rather as a symbolic means to indicate openness to the different and and enhancement of diversity itself. In these cases, more than the contents they convey, languages are exploited as powerful semiotic systems capable in themselves of communicating values and ideologies. Well, in addition to the two main functions, which often overlap, the results we have reached allow us to identify numerous roles and uses of the Schoolscape, the first of which can be defined as educational. In this sense, the Schoolscape is used as if it were like a third teacher, so as a support for learning didactic contents. And artifacts of the educational category were observed in all the schools visited, and also during interviews, some informant told of specific anecdotes in which they made the students produce billboards to place in class, while other teachers conjugated the questions in terms of management policy, revealing how teachers are free to manage the walls of the classroom as they please, differently from what happened in the common areas of the school. So in addition to teachers themselves, books and digital devices, Schoolscape is also seen and used to disseminate educational content. And these signs have very different characteristics, also in relation to the agency. In addition to the blackboard, of course, it's possible to distinguish between signs made by students during teaching activities and signs produced by external agents and then placed by students, like the one you can see in the slide. Well, from the content analysis showed that the type of content most present on the didactic signs is linked to the world of art, but the high percentage of artistic science is unexpected considering the official curricula of the investigated school, among which there are no artistic high schools or art schools. And equally surprising, also according to the informants, here we have a colorful except from an interview with the teacher, is the large amount of artifacts whose content is linked to geography, whose hourly presence in the curriculum is limited in the lower secondary school and almost zero in upper secondary school. And these results lead to the second role identified, that is the decorative one. So the Schoolscape, in this sense, is used to use an expression of a teacher in an interview, to make home, so to make the school a more welcoming place. And the results almost cast doubt on the first role, the educational one, assimilating it in some way to the decorative one. Considering what we have shown regarding geography or art, which are signs of didactic genre by their nature, but they are actually used to embellish, to fill the walls of the classrooms, even where geography or arts are not subject part of the curriculum. So in general, decorations have been documented in all the schools, and the range of signs is extremely wide and variety, demonstrating the importance of this role. And it's interesting to observe how all the school actors make their contribution in this effort, each putting into play their own skills, passion, and interest. Alongside these roles, there is another, that is the regulatory role of the Schoolscape. As schools are public buildings, the presence of certain signs is mandatory by law, and all schools are littered with such artifacts, but being taken for granted and not being posted by teachers themselves, they are often not noticed or considered interesting. The third, somewhat collateral role is that of advertising. Shops, companies, and educational agency exploit the school spaces to promote products, services, activities, events, and posters were observed in all schools. And so, like the urban linguistic landscape, therefore the Schoolscape is also an ideal space space in which to study the different manifestations of commercial discourse. And between the regulatory and decorative roles, there is a fifth role, which we defined as promotional role. So the Schoolscape, like the school websites, is used to exhibit the best works made by students, demonstrating of what the institution itself does. And the Schoolscape, therefore, can be compared to like a school window, like a postcard, to be presented also to potential future students. And some informants reveal how the Schoolscape can be an important factor to be exploited even during open days. So the 5 roles identified so far contribute, in our opinion, to form a 6th role, which encompasses them and exceeds them at the same time. That is the identity role of the Schoolscape. And this is related to the second research question, which is how the Schoolscape change according to the school. Of course, it's necessary to consider that each institution has very different structural characteristics, and all this affects the conformation of the Schoolscape, influencing its density of visible signs and making these spaces much more heterogeneous than one might expect. Nevertheless, the results allow us to identify in the identity role of the Schoolscape the real reason behind the variability of signs, both from a quantitative and qualitative perspective. The Schoolscape change, in fact, based on the identity of the school, the real one or the one it wants to convey. Based on the mission, so the official curriculum of the school, but also the hidden one, the hidden curriculum. And it's interesting to note that all the categories of science, educative, of advertising, of management, decorative, all the categories concur in determine and make visible the identity of the schools. So the semiotic space of the structure itself serves and reflects the identity and the atmosphere of the school. Well, as for agency, so the third questions, it would be necessary to say many things, but to summarize, the results show that teachers are the main responsible for the structure assumed by the Schoolscape, not so much as sign makers, but as issuers, so placing signs produced by external agents or making students realize them. And the students themselves independently collaborate in the production of school spaces, sometimes authorized by the teachers with the decoration of some kinds. But also in a transgressive way. So the linguistic configuration of the Schoolscape mainly depends on the agency of these two actors, who, however, operate within a framework of language policy established by the principal. And the role of the principal, in fact, although marginal in the creation or emplacement of signs in the Schoolscape, assumes a central weight in its regulation, and above all from the point of view of language policy regarding the visibility of migrant languages. The schools, in fact, in which artifacts containing texts in migrant languages were the same in which the principals themselves were aware of the importance of the Schoolscape, or better, they were aware of the importance of an immersion in plurilingual uses for the development of language awareness, what we were telling before. And this is linked to the third research question, with which we asked ourselves, what is the degree of awareness of the different actors toward the Schoolscape and its usefulness? Well, the results highlight lack of awareness on the part of also scholastic actors of the